This morning, I want to draw a little bit from the work of William Bridges, who wrote a seminal book on how we navigate across changes and transitions in our lives. It made me think, as just a stupid aside to begin the service, of how some people are born with names that give them clues as to what their future will hold. I think about it, William Bridges, a man who teaches people how to make transitions from one reality to another. So I also got me thinking about other people like this in my life, like other than John Behrens, my minister growing up, Forest Church, perfect for his position, right? This one's a little ribald. A friend of mine had a urologist whose name was spelled like a man who was destined for sailing. But in the world of homonyms, it made him also perfect for his specialty, S-E-A-M-E-N, or M-A-N, anyway, where there was this BuzzFeed article years ago that highlighted people who had just this issue. There was a chiropractor whose name was Dr. McCracken, and my absolute favorite, a fireman whose name is Lieutenant Les McBurney. I think we need him in California. I'm not sure we can woo him out here. Life. Anyhow, deep observations aside, 40 years ago, William Bridges, the man who had a perfect name for his job, he wrote this book called Transitions, Making Sense of Life's Changes. For him, changes and transitions are two slightly different things. Change is a kind of change in your circumstance, right? A new town, a new job, even a new baby in the family or a marriage. Transition, by contrast, is all the adaptation of who we are that has to happen to make that change settled in us. Right? A parent, obviously, does not really become a parent just because a baby is born, right? It's about a change in our sense of our role, at least in relationship to one other person, our priorities, even our sense of ourselves, right? That change requires of us. And the same is true for any life change. If you think about it, it's almost inevitable that if it's a big one, it requires this kind of deeper internal reordering of some piece, at least, of who we are. A transition, Bridges says, can be broken up into three different pieces, stages. There is an ending. Ironically, that's where things begin, with an ending. That's where change begins. And then we move through this time of uncertainty, of chaos, of reordering, that time that Henry Nouwen compares to the flight of the trapeze artist, unmoored through space. And then there's this last stage, this new beginning, the embracing of the new beginning. Well, in religious communities and in many cultures through time, there were always a variety of rites of passage, of rituals that helped us human beings take any change and sort of make it into a transition. In ancient Greece, for instance, girls from before puberty until the birth of their first child as women, young women, they could go to the temple of Artemis at Brauron for festivals that were tailor-made to help prepare them for these transitions. The ending of childhood, the magnitude of becoming a woman, the chaos and danger of pregnancy, and the futures, yet uncertain, that all these changes had as part of them. There were all these spaces and rituals and guides for naming and holding all these places of ending and unsettling in-betweenness and preparing ourselves to really step into these new beginnings. Years ago, for instance, thinking of this same idea, I read the autobiography of A. Ravati, a hijra or transgender woman in India. Her book is filled with stories of how, within that community that involves chosen families that people join into, because often they're cast out of their own families, that there are rituals of joining, that there are transitions that help the women make their journey through the gender transitions that they're involved in, even around the surgeries and biological transitions if they choose and are able to have those. For such a rich and complicated set of life transitions, there is help within a somewhat hostile culture for those who know how to hold and frame and bless these women's evolution of them sense of themselves and their place in the world. Well, increasingly in American society, my experiences were often left to make all these transitions on our own, or to make up rituals, some of which aren't the best engineered for really rich internal transition and preparation. I mean, think about it. There is the bachelor or bachelorette party. It's bacchanalian for sure, but maybe not the richest preparation for an important life transition. And I'm sure you can think of others, or none at all, which is equally as significant. And the effect of not taking these transitions seriously is we are finding just how not fully ready we are then to step into the next chapter of life, fully present and alive. Right? Someone asked me recently, had my family taken time to grieve what we loved and left behind in our 2 years of India? We hadn't, not in any formal way. And rituals and rites of passage are supposed to be my business, so the cobbler has no child has no shoes, apparently. Or think about concepts like the notion of rebound relationships. How many can you raise? How much explanation? Does people know what a rebound relationship is? All right, well, it's the name that we give for relationships when someone leaps right after a breakup, usually a significant, relationship breakup, into the arms of a new relationship. And it's not usually used as a flattering term, how joyous it is that you're in a rebound relationship. Our alarm bells tend to go off in such moments, right? Because we know that there is power in the hard work of grieving and processing the good and the not so good of a previous relationship that just ended. And that if we don't do that work, the relationships that follow will be hurt or hobbled for us not having done so, right? And yet, many of us, most of us, I think, don't really like this time between endings and new beginnings. There is this natural human tendency to want to rush through them, to leap over thresholds, rather than walk through them or stand in the doorway and catch our breath for a moment before stepping into the next chapter. Yet wisdom lies in the thresholds, in these in-between times in our lives. They can be the most generative for change and reflection. I mean, just think about it. You know this is true in your bones. Pregnancy, that 10 months that a child is coming to life inside a body, it's a forced time on the threshold between life before parenting and life as a parent to ponder all of what that might mean. Let go of life before, get ready to embrace life to be. Or think of rehab. Rehab is such a time, right? Where you sit having broken some of the habits, made decisions about a life of addiction, and you sit with the question of what life will be without those patterns of addiction. What you hope and what you fear when you get out of a protected environment, how you will remake your life before you have to do it. Or time in the hospital after a surgery or a serious illness before you're sent home to live the new normal, to think about how this is settling into your sense of yourself and the life you will face after this episode. Or what about the time at the gate in the airport? Am I the only one who has incredibly deep spiritual, personal reflection in the airport? Yes, Linda Enger says. I can't believe that. It's very rich space. First of all, there's always great coffee right there to kind of get your juices going. But to me, usually when I'm in an airport, it's like at the end of a trip, and I have this chance to think about what I learned or what I felt or how I want to step back into my life, having stepped away from it for a moment, gotten up on the balcony, hopefully, for a little perspective. There are these small and large neutral threshold places in our lives everywhere, and they are offering their wisdom to us if we can learn to be present to it, to hold ourselves present to them. Which is where the poem that Daniel read this morning, that poem by John O'Donohue, feels like a lovely touchstone for how we might live in and hold such spaces, right? The poet writes, you may remember, I would love to live like a river flows, carried by the surprise of its own unfolding. Now, I personally can't imagine living my whole life like that. I'm a little too controlling, I'll admit. But I do think there are times to choose to live like that, times to hold an open posture, to stand in wondering, to listen, and that threshold times might be just those times. Maybe you're in a threshold time right now. I think we in this congregation are in one of those times right now. And I think it helps us to know that, to frame and hold the purposes and the presence we bring to this time. We are thoughtfully getting the love boat ready to sail. Capital campaigns to fix bathrooms and landscape the frontage and put a new roof on so the ship is seaworthy. We have a mission vision process launched earlier this month so we can create the map by which we will navigate the next 3 to 5 years. We are poised between the ending of an era with gifts and tumult, wise to take stock of it before we step into the future, and listening deeply. That listening began at the World Cafe kickoff event with 100 people there dreaming and brainstorming and naming and laughing together. And originally what I wanted to do this morning is tell you all the themes and stuff that I saw arising out of those pages posted on the wall. But Dr. Johnson, our consultant, told me I couldn't do that, because we're still gathering wisdom and I shouldn't bias the rest of you. And of course she's right, because the whole point is not to rush through these moments of threshold, which is exactly what I was doing. So we're organizing focus groups and surveys and doing stakeholder interviews and trying to find all these ways to listen to what's bubbling up, and underlying it all is this choice, this discipline, really, to surrender to these in-between spaces. Some might call this a kind of Taoist approach to life in this moment, right? Flow like the river unfolding, bends like the grass with the breeze. Some might call it opening and listening for the collective conscious. Mystics might say it's a time of probing the deeper places of mysterious knowing. Humanists might speak of the wisdom of the whole that comes from deeply participatory dialogue. And Jews and Christians might speak of listening to the still small voice within. However you describe it for yourself, theologically or philosophically, or to whatever you attribute the wisdom, through time, human beings have felt the power of these spaces and the ability of what unfolds within them to be surprising and deeply revelatory, which is why I was so surprised at the congregational meeting when people were really worried about suspending a bylaw, maybe rightly, and we're totally happy to just move on with the mission vision process. I thought, if you know what's really dangerous, it's the mission vision process. In an exciting kind of way that things can be dangerous. So we're opening ourselves to all of that as we stand in this threshold place, as we're invited to in our lives 1,000 times. I'm pretty sure a few things will definitely come of this, as is true in our own lives. I think in all transitions, the hope is and the work is to carry the best of who we are forward into the next chapter, not leave that behind. I think at best, the future speaks to something that is rooted in the particularity of who we are and the world we are connected to bring our gifts, to make good use of ourselves in the unfolding of the world of greater justice and love. For us, I think that will mean looking at how we perpetuate and participate in systems of oppression and exclusion and diminishment, not by intent, but by impact of our culture, of our shared life. I think that will be a piece of what we unpack as we remake ourselves as we step forward. Like all transitions, it will mean discomfort, at least because you're giving up exactly who you've been to become exactly, not quite sure who you will be, and that can be unnerving. I call those growing pains. And I hope and expect that what the future holds will be grounded in a life of real love and care for one another, animated by joy and delight at our core. Those, after all, are the well springs that will feed us generously and generatively for a really full life. We want to care deeply, but as John Behrens says, we don't want to be terminally earnest. And joy and delight and love and care, I think, help us do both those things. And since there's joy and love and delight now, we just hang on to them. So this is part of why we give, to feed a life that feeds us, a life that's unfolding among us, at least its next chapter right in front of us. And we give generously because, as I said when I preached to our denomination in 2013, you cannot have big dreams, not really on a starvation diet. So to unleash all the power and beauty of this place, we cannot be half in or tie our legs together. To that end, I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who, year after year, chooses to risk on us. It's a countercultural act I want to thank even those who are far away, who we hardly see, who still bet part of their legacy on us, their legacy to the world. Thank them. I chose ministry 25 years ago or so because I wanted to be with people who would make me better than I was, always. And I would say a gradual expansion over time of generosity of self, of risking on the us, not just me, has been the most miraculous of those changes or transitions for which I am grateful to this faith and to people like you. I feel bigger than I was and deeper. So what threshold times are you in, my good people? And how can you hold them? What endings are you on the cusp of that need to be honored and blessed and mourned? How can you let yourself be in the in-betweenness for a while, quiet and open, listening and trusting? And when the time comes and the bar comes out of the shadows, comes into the spotlight of our seeing and knowing, heading straight for you, may we know ourselves prepared in heart and mind and spirit to take hold with gusto and sail into the next chapter of our life, just out of view. Blessings. In the threshold places of our lives, may they be rich with wisdom and prepare us for richer, fuller life, always. Amen.